Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 5-minute daily devotionals for today. This is a series of short videos sharing some thoughts on a passage mula sa ating Moravian Daily Text readings. And today's reading is taken from 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 10 to 20. So from yesterday, we have a passage from verse 1 to 9. Hindi natin na-touch sa ating last video. And just to briefly mention about that, it talks about how Paul preached the gospel of Christ with such enthusiasm and such effectivity that he did that despite conflicts, as mentioned in verse 3. He did that not to please men, but to please God, verse 4. He did this preaching of the gospel without seeking the glory of the people that he's serving or the people around him. That's mentioned in verse 6. And that in verse 7 and 8, we know that he shared the gospel, not only the gospel, but also himself. Yung buhay niya mismo, binahagi niya. He shared it as if like a mother to her children. He was a father, a spiritual father in many respects sa mga mananampalataya sa Thessalonica. This is the ministry of Paul. And this is how we should live our lives as disciple makers. Now, hindi ko sinasabi na maging katulad tayo ni Pablo, pero Paul has laid out an example for us to live by. This is how Paul shared the gospel effectively in those times. Despite the conflicts, pleasing God, not men, seeking not the glory of men, but preaching the gospel and sharing of himself. Such is the desire that we should have when we share the gospel. Now, Paul goes on to say in our reading from verse 10 that he is reminding the Thessalonians na ginawa nito at saksi mismo yung mga Thessalonians. Tandaan natin, yung gawain, yung ministeryo doon sa Thessalonica was established by Paul and Silas. So, the Thessalonian believers were witnesses, first-hand witnesses. Naranasan nila, nakita nila, narinig nila, na experience nila how it is that Paul went about preaching the gospel. He said in verse 10, he did so preaching the gospel blameless and with a righteous conduct. Now, hindi ito isang bagay na ginagawa ng maraming tao, no? We don't talk about how well we did things, but Paul was so confident that he did this in the right attitude, in the right way, in accordance to God's will, that he was bold enough to say, saksi ko kayo. Ako, ginawa ko yung gawain ng Diyos na pagpapahayag ng Ebanghelyo with blamelessness and righteous conduct. He went on to say, even in verses 11 to 12, that he did this like a father with his children. Again, the analogy that Paul is laying down. Kanina binanggit natin, he was like a mother to her children. But now Paul is saying that he is like a father with his children. If we are to be effective sa ating pagpapahayag ng Ebanghelyo, if we are to be effective in making disciples of Jesus Christ, this is the kind of attitude we should develop in ourselves. Now, this is not something that we can do just by willpower o dahil ginusto natin, na sinabi ni Ronald, no. This is something that God allows us to do as He does His work in our lives, changing the way we do things, changing the way we desire things, changing the way we behave in our hearts. We are being transformed to be a father to his children. Now, just to give you again a strong imagery here. Ako ay ama ng dalawang babae. I did not really train myself up para maging tatay. And yet, I was enabled by God to be a father to these two wonderful girls. This is something that we may think na we were pushed into being a father or being pushed being a mother. And yet, by God's grace, we are able to do so. Now, imagine that when it comes to guiding people to becoming followers of Jesus Christ. As a mother to her children, as a father with his children, God can use you to be a spiritual father, a spiritual mother to somebody else. Now, don't get me wrong, we will still make mistakes. We will not get everything right. But we have a God that works in and through us. So much so that Paul even mentioned that the Thessalonians did not receive the word of Paul as a word of man, but they received the gospel as if it was God speaking to them. It is God's word spoken into their lives. That's why they became followers of Christ. I pray that we will be like Paul, a father to his children, a mother to their children, guiding them to become more like Christ, just like a true disciple maker. May God bless you as you live out and follow God's word.